Welcome to the milestone 25th Miami Jewish Film Festival, the world's largest festival of its kind. We want to thank all of our members, sponsors, community partners, and all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, for their continued support throughout all of these years. I'm Rabbi Andrew Ergis, the CEO of Hebrew at the Center, and I'm excited to be moderating a virtual conversation with director Yair Qedar on the film HaPerek HaAcharon Shel Aleph Bet Yehoshua, the Last Chapter of A.B. Yehoshua, which is premiering at this year's film festival. Thank you all for joining us. Yair, it's such a pleasure to meet you and to have the opportunity to get closer to Aleph Bet Yehoshua and his work through your wonderful film. The film opens with Yehoshua speaking about your work with Ha'ivrim, the Hebrews, the film series that you have led on the lives of Yehoshua and over a dozen Hebrew writers. Before we dig into this film that we're just watched now, what led you to make the shift from your academic background in Hebrew literature and in journalism into filmmaking?
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here. I'm very happy to share the film. I think it's the North American premiere of this film, which is a favorite of mine. Also, Aleph Bet Yehoshua is a favorite a new friend of mine. I studied Hebrew literature in the Tel Aviv University, and I wanted to make films. And I think 15 years ago, I decided to combine my two loves, Hebrew literature and filmmaking, and to create something which was a bit rare in Israel. And this is a series of biographies. Each biography is also a literary biography. And I use a lot of animation and design and music and all kinds of cinematic instruments to create some kind of a poetic literary experience through the films. And it began with a film about Leah Goldberg. And then it's like a big wave. It's already 16 films, and this year we're getting another 3, so it's going to be 19 films. And it's becoming Israel's largest documentary project ever. And the end is not seen yet because the definition is very wide and open. It began with Israeli writers, but also Jewish writers, and now it's also Jewish thinkers, writers. We're making now a film about Freud, Spinoza, and Marx. And in the past, of course, Bialik, Aleph Bet Yehoshua, and Oz, but also Shalom Shabazi, Abraham Sutzkeber, the Yiddish writer, the women writers, Zelda, Miriam Elan Shtekelis, Yona Volach, Leah Goldberg. So I think I became like an ambassador to Jewish creativity and treasures, and that's what I feel daily. That I'm an ambassador to Jewish treasures, really.
Well, although I'm a rabbi and a leader of a nonprofit that focuses on Hebrew, I knew we were simpatico. I happen to have an undergraduate degree in film and a master's in Hebrew literature. So I think we probably share a lot of the same passions, including passion for books. And I'd love to understand or help our viewers understand sort of the role of books and literature in Israeli culture. Israel's known for its Hebrew Book Week, and whether that is changing with, we'll use a Hebrew word, the Americanization of Israeli society. And if this is one of the reasons that you decided to take literature and bring it to the small screen.
I think that literature was the main form of art, the most influential form of art since the beginning of Zionism, and until I believe 10 years ago, 15 years ago in Israel. That was the leading art. No art had its strengths, had its power, had its influence. And the writers of the canon, and I make films about people in the canon or outside, some more central, some more marginal. The 2 films I'm presenting now are very central. Amos Oz was the main character, the Israeli writer, and Aleph Bet Yehoshua as well. Both of them are the main writers in the last 30 years until a few years ago. And they told the Israeli story from many, many angles. They're both involved in the peace movement. But they had perhaps, they had the megaphone. They told the Israeli stories through their stories. So and they reached sometimes because of the politics, but also of course because of the talent, many countries in the world. And it's many people read their main novels. Some of the main writings of A.B. Yehoshua, the short stories, but later on the novels, it was read by an enormous number of people. You will not see it again. And the same numbers you can only see now in some binge watching on a Netflix. So that's the only parallel. Now, the numbers are gone. Yes, we don't achieve this kind of megaphones or amplifiers as artists. Writers have lost it sadly. So it's also the story of an art that is now leaving its main role. So it's like homage to what used to be, and it's an opportunity for me to interview those people. If not those people, then the people that were in the circling them, their family, their colleagues, writers, and I consider it a little bit of an homage. This is my homage. This is the homage of our culture to the giants that lived with us, are still living with us. A.B. Yehoshua is a giant that lives with us. Yes.
I know that Yehoshua was a part of a generation of Israeli authors really emerging from the 60s who made a conscious choice to move away from the national narrative and really focus in on individuals and on the individual experience. And I was wondering, in what way do you think this film about Aleph Bet Yehoshua reflects that? And if there's a particular moment in the film that you think would be particularly helpful for us as viewers to say, that was really what A.B. Yehoshua was as an individual?
Well, I think A.B. Yehoshua is I call him Bully, if it's okay. Bully is in the field, that's a nickname, yes. So Bully is a person full of contradictions, yes. He told me in the beginning of the film that he will cry all the time and he will die soon. Most of the things did not happen. So he's very individual, and but it also, you feel is a part of the generation of writers and artists that were more individualistic, less nationalistic on the one hand, but on the other hand, he's in perfect a sample of an Israeli of the last generation, which feels that he is responsible for the notion of Israel, for being Israeli. So he's individualistic, but on the other hand, he's very Israeli. And it's one moment of the film when you feel it is, he says the last speech in Bet Bialik. He said, I'm very, very anxious. And what would he be anxious about? His health, his life, his loves, his family. It's about the country. And the editor put a little pause there. And that is the connection. Very private, very artistic, very individualistic, but on the other hand, feels the burden of and the responsibility and identifies with Israeliness in the most profound way. And also another link that I would like to make, the dishwashing about his wife. Yes, so he made a choice with his wife to be wise and not just. So he needed to organize reality and find harmonious solution. That's what leads him to Ramallah, to meet the Palestinian counterparts. He goes and it suggests them an harmonious solution because he feels the responsibility to create a harmony and to save the Israeli dream, which is being attacked by so many people in Israel.
You mentioned three extremely powerful and poignant moments in the film, and I'd love to unpack those a little with you, along with yet another contradiction. About halfway through the film, we see but for a moment, a picture of him and Amos Oz hugging one another. It's very, very powerful. And I was wondering, Amos Oz, unlike Aleph Bet Yehoshua, Bully, is, really associated with a sort of that Ashkenazi left, that whole generation of what was almost Ashkenormative, like sort of that is what it meant to be Israeli. And Bully seems to so resist being put in a box. He doesn't want to be known as a Moroccan like his mother or a Sephardi like his father. Um, do you think he was actually successful at that? At sort of placing himself within that sort of central Ashkenazi normative? Or does he bring out in his work and in his life these other roots, this other history?
It's a very, very good point and interesting question. And I don't know if it's possible to answer it right now, but it's very interesting to see that he comes from the same neighborhood as Amos Oz. They knew each other, you know, as children, later in the Scouts, in the Tzofim, and later a very, very good friend for 65 years. And in the film, we tell about Agnon. Bully goes with his father to Agnon, and Agnon tells you, write about the Sephardi folklore. Bully says no, so he had to hide, to suppress his Mizrahi identity. His father, by the way, becomes a writer. He writes 11 books on the Jerusalem folklore. So the competitive writers after the meeting with Agnon. But then Bully, he has his own path, and someone made a comment about Chaim Be'er wrote a novel called Ropes, autobiographical novel about about his life in Jerusalem. Amos Oz wrote Tale of Love and Darkness, which is the most powerful autobiographical creation in Israeli literature in the last 20 years. And Bully at the same time writes, it's called Shlichuto Shel Memone Al Mashabe Enosh, I don't know what it's called, what's the translation in English, about a person who goes to Romania to identify a body of immigrant worker. So he runs away from the autobiography, from the Mizrahi, yes, because he listens to Agnon, but vice versa. If he writes to Mizrahi, he will not be the all-Israeli writer. But another angle that he did write about Mizrahi issue, but it is in his own way, in Molcho, in The Voyage to the End of the Thousand, and another novel. So he has his own path, and you see that it's conflicted. So because it's conflicted, it is not known, but I think he have it both ways. He's considered a good Mizrahi writer, is a good all-Israeli writer, but it's also because he's not consistent and because he's very charming.
So you make me think also about another contradiction. I'd love to hear your thoughts. He's very straightforward about resisting any sort of nostalgia, and yet, you know, you tell his story and you borrow, you know, you make certain that we understand his past, that we understand his roots. You already mentioned that beautiful moment when he's thinking about his beloved late wife. So he feels very strongly about his parents' challenged relationship. So tell us a little how he kind of mediated that resistance to nostalgia, and yet constantly going back to the past.
Yes, but you know, I wanted him to go back to the past. He didn't do it voluntarily, so it's my role, it's my part. But it was interesting in the beginning of when I met him for the first time, when I invited him to talk about Amos Oz, then we became more friends, and I started to make the film. He told me that in the age of around 13, he went with his mother and his sister for 2 months to Morocco for his bar mitzvah. And I thought, you know, Morocco in the 50s, 2 months for the imagination of what could be more, you know, fantastic and exotic, etc. This is the origin place where stories are giving birth. And then he resisting on, he didn't want to talk about it. He said, I'm not nostalgic. He didn't want to talk about his childhood. So he kept, you know, objecting me directing him to talk about the past, but it didn't work for him all the time. And on the other hand, his friend of him, Sarah Parenzo, got a special permission to hold a series of interviews, audio interviews of him telling her, she records that, about his childhood. So I got the objection and she got the reward, but I made something happen and there will be some record. It will be a book sometime.
Oh, kol hakavod. You mentioned that you like to refer to him as Bully, and I was curious. Maybe you can help us understand both where did that nickname come from, and his name is Avraham Gavriel Yehoshua. What led him to take on the writer's name of A.B. or Aleph Bet? Is it, there's a wonderful piece you show about how he fails in composition,
Uh,
and yet he then says he then began to acquire a sense for words, and through them, literature. Is he just being fun and saying, like, you know, uh, choosing the name, I'm a seller of books, that he decides I'm just Aleph Bet Yehoshua. I'm a simple person who builds out of letters, words out of words, thoughts out of thoughts, literature. Like, where's that come from? Where does Bully come from?
Bully in high school, he was a bit short and white. So some of the girls called him a bully, which is completely not his nature. He's definitely not a bully, but that remained his nickname for throughout the years. And the riddle of the name, I don't have a solution for the riddle of the name. So actually, is a person that doesn't have a real name. He has a nickname, and he has several literary names. You're right. It's Avraham Gavriel Yehoshua. It's Avraham Bet Yehoshua. It's Aleph Bet Yehoshua. So he runs around the world with 3 or 4 names. Not one name is the prominent name, but one thing was good that I got a tip from the widow of Amos Oz, Nili Oz. I asked her, would Bully would mind if I make a film about him? How do I convince him to? And she said, if you call him on the phone and say Bully, he will give you what you want. If you call, can I talk with Mr. Yehoshua? I will not. So that helped.
That sounds like a very smart move. I mean, you allow us in to see his creative, both through historical footage and footage that your crew shoots. We really get to see his creative process. Like, what was your creative process besides doing that sort of field work and research before you jumped in? How do you put together a film like this?
This is the first time I make a documentary where I'm shooting a live writer, and I had plans. It was like in the beginning of COVID. I was supposed to go to Italy and France and England and to do many, many things that could not happen. And we had long lockdowns. And I live about 1 mile, I think, from Bully. So during lockdowns, I used to come to his balcony and talk to him, and we Zoom, and we became friends. And we had to change the film. And the studio, the place where everything was happening was his flat. You cannot go out. So I brought sometimes the camera and also friends. He had meetings in house. His flat, his big apartment became the place where the film is happening. And when the lockdown is off, we can go to some places as Jerusalem Cemetery or to other places, Jaffa, but not really far. So reality made sure that the film will be as it is. And it was many, 50 or 60 hours of shooting him. And all the time it was, how intimate can we go? How deep? His wife was amazing. Is the Ika. She's psychoanalyst, but she also, because she was not there, I could make the film. Because she a little bit controlled him. But she was away. He said, I'm completely open to you. I trust you. And I said, I will not use your trust for the worse. I will respect you. You're going to have a very sensitive and honorable, and I hope intelligent profile of you. Let's do it together. And after 2 days of shooting, he said, okay, you have enough. Bye-bye. It was nice meeting you. No. It takes time. So I had to fight his patience all the time. And we went to the cemetery in Jerusalem. There is a scene we cannot find the graves of his parents, and then the worker there finds them. So, then after 1 hour there, he said, okay, you're dragging an old man to the cemetery, take me back home. I had enough of this film. And then he heard the worker, I'm finding the grave. So he was curious. Okay, and he was running to find the grave of his parents there. So he was a good partner for the search and the making of the film. And in the early stage, I discovered that I could not use critiques and people to interview about his work because he's the main character. He's so charismatic. I don't want to see anyone else on the screen. And also to Erez Gavish, the designer. We made the decision together to have this watercolor animation, very mild, very gentle, to bring the literary part.
Were there any parts of his story that you shot and you really, really loved, but you felt like they needed to just live on the cutting room floor in order to tell the story you ended up telling?
Just 99%.
Was there a particular thing that looking back, you wish you could at least show it to others because it gives such a great insight?
It was very. We went to the election day. We went to vote, and he sat there, and people were passing by and talking to him. It was like a king. And Orthodox guys coming to him from the left and from the right. He communicated with the people. Such a beautiful moment was there. And you saw, it's the show off of the writer. It was not there. It was so genuine and warm. And I love this. I love this about him. It's very rare for the writer. I'm making a film about him. He should be in the center. And he begins the film was talking about me and the Hebrews, and also in the premiere of the film when we had Ruby Rivlin and other people, he went up to the stage after the film was over and talked about the new films that I'm making. He's very generous, and I love him very much, and I'm very happy to talk to him once a week, and sometimes invite him to do Zooms. He does Zooms still.
I actually was gonna. You mentioned this scene, and I was gonna. And I'm really wondering, you take us on this journey with Yehoshua into the territories, then leaving sort of, going into Area C and arriving in Ramallah, taking us on a trip that most of your viewers have never taken. Quite frankly, most Israelis these days don't take that trip, and we hear him share his views, his frustration that after 50 years of working for a two-state solution, he's now considering a single state, a binational state, which is a perspective that is really far out of the consensus of most contemporary Israelis. Has his political views in any way impacted how his work is received and perceived by Israeli society?
Interesting. No, you could say that about Amos Oz in a way, but still, when people took, A Tale of Love and Darkness and My Michael, they read it without Peace Now, and they just people could make you see the difference, yes, see the gap, and I don't think Yehoshua suffered from any political story in his literary career, and it's wonderful to see that he cares. At his age, he wanted to go to Ramallah. He wanted to talk about his vision. He wanted to talk to them. I think it's quite amazing. With the cancer radiations and treatments, and with COVID, insisting on doing that, so he feels obligated to share his vision, his solution with the other side. It's amazing, and but in his novels you see different questions, different angles, different sensitivities. He will keep surprising us, and not only in his previous work, but not only in The Only Child, his last novella, but also yesterday I heard that he finished a new novel. So he will keep on surprises us with his vitality. I wish I would have this vitality at his age.
I loved how he said he needed a little libido. I actually do want to go back to a scene you mentioned earlier, and just now mentioning this last novella of his, The Only Daughter. When we see him speaking at Beit Bialik, and he shares with the audience that he's not doing so well, that he's older, we know that he has this illness. When he shares his greatest fear, it really is that fear for the country. in particular after the decades and decades of work that he and his friends have done, and how deeply concerned they are about the country. And I thought it was interesting, somebody who wanted to write about the individual and try to escape the national narrative still is very much concerned about that national narrative. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, as a filmmaker, as you view that, and I know you're also a social activist in your own right, is it possible for Israeli artists, writers, poets, filmmakers to escape being engaged with the national narrative of Israel?
I'm afraid not. I'm afraid not. This is this is the destiny. This is the identity. But on the other hand, how can we be creative? How can we do wonderful creative things? Because creativity we do not lack here. I think in a way. I think, but perhaps being more individual and less nationalistic. This is more what the critics used to say about Aleph Bet Yehoshua and his generation, but they were still very, very Zionist all of the time. And I think it will not last for the younger generation are not as deeply Zionist as they are. And it was, it's this generation of Peres. The destiny of the country is me. I'm part of this heart. You cannot see it with Edgar Keret, and you will not see it with younger people anymore. On the one hand, on the other hand, we cannot do nothing that does not relate to our very interesting position in reality.
Yair, I'd love to just ask a few more questions. The first one, sort of as a filmmaker, towards the end of the film, you cut away to another section of Yehoshua's work. It's a section, Molchor, in the English translation, it's known as the 5 Seasons, considered really one of the 10 most important books ever written in Israel. And you have the narrator speaking about the protagonist, and then it moves to the inner thoughts of the protagonist, and suddenly it's a woman's voice, even though the Hebrew is in first person, masculine form. What led you to make that interesting choice?
It's a very good observation. The two narrators are in the film. There are Oded Kotler and Lior Rivling, some of the best actors that in Israel, and they're friends with Bully for many, many years. Creative friends. They made some of his, performed some of his plays, and we wanted to liberate his work a little bit from its original gender. And Israel is very gendered in itself. So we wanted to be a little bit playful in the end. And Bully says he had 2 major writings. It's Mar Mani, Mr. Mani, I think it's called in English.
Yeah.
And 5 Seasons. The 2 great works, and the people are divided to 2 camps. Molcho, so I chose the Molcho side, and that's why. And also, it was amazing for me to see how he predicted in a very strange way his future, because Molcho tells the story of a Sephardi widow. His wife dies of cancer, and he looks for, what should I do now? And it's also a little bit Bully now, his wife leaving him. What shall I do now? Where is my hope? Where is my life? Where is my libido? What will I do with the sunset and sunrise? So it was very interesting parallel to say, and we wanted to be a little bit playful with that, and also lead the way to the song in the end, sung by Lior Rivlin, which is a very cheerful pop song, but we changed its sound design, and we made it more meditative and sad and sensitive and delicate. Leaving him is the last shot alone in the tower. We look at him, but he looks at us at the same time.
It's a powerful moment, and the refrain of the song, which is you've slowed down the tempo and its focus on the words and the notes, made me also think about that name Aleph Bet and the starting with the simple building blocks. It's just a beautiful piece of cinema. I'm glad you were playful because you really share with us what a sense of humor he has. He's a very funny guy, and you do a great job at sharing. I'm just curious because he was one of the authors you focus on who's still living. What did he think about the film, and in particular about that you chose the title, The Last Chapter? That's a bit dark.
I just want to say also about the ending, because we had the ending with a piano, with a little bit depressing piano. And the sound designer, Aviv Aldema, suggested to add a whistle. Because this is not a sad film. This is a film about choosing life. So he made the whistle. Just when we finished the film, he added the whistle and he gave it some humoristic and proportionate closing, I think. We chose the name of the film together. So I couldn't have chosen such a name without his advising him. And also, he didn't want, I told him, don't see the film. Come to the Jerusalem Film Festival, see it for the first time, the big screen, that's the best way. And just a week before the festival, he went to David Grossman. Grossman said, I have the film. You must see the film before it's shown. This is your obligation. And I told him, please tell David Grossman not to interfere with my relationship with my writers, and I will show you. And I came Sunday morning, 9 o'clock. He kept ringing me, are you coming, are you coming? We sat in his office, in his house, and he sat near the computer, and I sat behind him because he would sit near him and would talk to me all the time. I didn't want him to talk. And then 2 minutes after the film began, he looked at me and smiled. That's the Ruby Rivlin talk, when Ruby Rivlin doesn't listen to him exactly, says, okay, now I'm relaxed. And then all the time, every 5 minutes, he looked at me. Sometimes he was laughing, sometimes he was crying. It's very emotional for him. And in the end of the film, he said, can I kiss you? And we kissed on the cheeks. And he said, I'm proud of myself because I trusted you from the first minute, and you show that you deserve this trust. This is an authentic portrait of me now, of the last chapter of me. And it's very rare for a person to talk about his last chapter, about death, about the ending in such a peaceful and wise way. This is very rare. And I think the film is not only about a writer or A.B. Yehoshua. It's also a film about aging, about geriatry, about death, about how should we end it. So he gives a nice recipe to how to end it with very good proportion.
So Yair, it really is a powerful homage to this man, and clearly, if he has yet another book coming out, he's getting a bit of the last laugh, even though you're calling it the last chapter. May he have many more chapters to write. I guess my final question is, what's next for Yair Qedar? Who will be either the next feature of Ha'ivrim, the Hebrews, or is there another project you're excited to be working on?
There's 3 new chapters in the films in the Hebrews. One that I'm directing by Sigmund Freud. Another, David Ofek is directing about Baruch Spinoza. And the third one, Benjamin Friedenberg is directing a film about Karl Marx. So we're very, very busy and anxious with a large corpus, and it's very challenging and thrilling. And I think in a year and a half, the film will be ready, and perhaps we'll reconvene, and perhaps without Zoom.
from Amen, amen. Yair, thank you so much. Yair Qedar is the director of the film The Last Chapter of A.B. Yehoshua. We thank him for joining us. Once again, we also thank all of you, our members, our sponsors, community partners, volunteers, and all of you film lovers for participating in this milestone 25th Miami Jewish Film Festival. Toda rabba v'lehitraot.
Toda rabba.